Hi, welcome to this episode of Faith and Logic. In this episode of Faith and Logic, we are going to discuss about what is postmodernism and what are the impacts on Christianity. So let's just look at the first question. What is postmodernism? Postmodernism is a culture and a philosophical movement which started in mid 20th century that affirms no objective or absolute truth, especially in the matters of religion and spirituality. So, postmodernism, as the word says, post, that means after modernism. So, after the modernism, the movement which started, this is a cultural and a philosophical movement which basically rejects the objective truth or objective moral values. It is a kind of a statement like true for you, but not for me. Many times we hear this slogan in a public square. Christianity may be true for you, but not for me. You believe this may be true for you, but not for me. So that philosophy is called postmodernism. It is a reaction against modernism's emphasis on reason and universal truth. Now, true for me and not for you, that can particularly work for a situation where, let's see, a particular food. You may like some food, let's say pizza, you like pizza more, and someone else doesn't like pizza more. So for you, pizza is more tastier or it's your favorite food, but for someone else, it's something else. So in case of food, in case of art, subjective truth would work out. But in case of religion or in the matters of faith, something like the postmodern philosophy is not going to work out, true for you and not for me. Postmodernism emphasizes subjectivity, diversity, and relativity. It questions the authority, objectivity, and grand narratives. Now let's look at what are the dangers of postmodernism. Postmodernism has skepticism towards universal truth, relativism in morality and knowledge. Basically, it does not accept the absolute moral values or absolute right and wrong. It rejects the objective truth that there is an absolute truth. Deconstruction of text and traditions, which we see nowadays more very common. Emphasis on pluralism and diversity, that all religion leads to the same path. That kind of a philosophy. Suspicions of institutions and authorities. So let's look at the first one, relative truth. In 14th to 17th century, thinkers began to elevate humankind to the center of reality. The philosopher Immanuel Kant, he argued that true knowledge about God was impossible. So he created a divide of knowledge between facts and faith. Facts have nothing to do with religion. So basically, he came up with a philosophy that facts have nothing to do with religion. The other way to remember about Kant's philosophy is that you cannot know the reality. That is a kind of a philosophy that he holds on to. Modernism believed in absolute, in science, God's special revelation, the Bible, was evicted from the realm of truth and certainty. From modernism came postmodernism. As I said, postmodernism came from modernism. The ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche, who believed that all knowledge, including science, is a matter of perspective and interpretation. Basically, it's your own interpretation, the way you like to interpret the text or the way you like to interpret a particular religion. That is how. Basically, there is no absolute right and wrong. It's a rejection of any absolute truth, a rejection of truth that transcends all people and cultures. Let's look at the second danger of postmodernism, and that is loss of discernment. Thomas Aquinas once said that it is the task of the philosopher to make distinctions. This means that the truth is dependent upon the ability to discern, the capability to distinguish this from that. How you distinguish this from that in the realm of knowledge. If objective and absolute truth does not exist, then everything becomes a matter of personal interpretation. So if there is no absolute truth, then Basically, someone says this is my truth, and you say this is my truth, and there is no absolute truth. So you cannot discern between what is truth and what is false. Now, the third danger of the postmodernism is pluralism. Basically, the ideology that all religion teach the same thing, or all the religion take us to the same God. If absolute truth does not exist, then if there is no way to make meaningful right-wrong distinctions between different faith and religion, then the natural conclusion is that all belief must be considered equally valid. So that's the kind of a philosophy that postmodernism holds, the pluralism. Now, all religions are on its periphery, they are same because they teach the same moral principle like do not lie, do not steal, murder is wrong. So most of the religion hold these moral values. So they are peripherally same, but fundamentally they are different. Like for example, Christianity and Islam are fundamentally different. Muslims accept Jesus as a prophet, but not as God. They believe that Jesus was not crucified, whereas we Christians believe that he was crucified and he rose on the third day. So if he was never crucified, if someone else was crucified on the place of Jesus, that means that he never died, then he never rose from the dead. That means Christianity is false. So Islam and Christianity are very opposite to each other at its fundamental doctrines. So pluralism cannot be true. There has to be an objective truth. When we say truth, truth is what corresponds to the reality. We need to look and find in the history that whether Jesus was crucified or not, whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. That is why pluralism is wrong. With pluralism, no religion has the right to pronounce itself true and the other competing faith false or even inferior. So you cannot even say this religion is right or wrong based on pluralism. Now, the fourth problem is deconstructionism. Deconstructionism is basically a theory of textual criticism or interpretation that denies that there is any single correct meaning or interpretation of the passage or text. So basically, when you read the Bible, according to deconstructionist view, you cannot interpret anything with an absolute meaning. It denies any single correct meaning or interpretation of the passage or the text. To the deconstructionist, there is no right or wrong interpretation. The meaning of the text becomes whatever the reader wants it to be. So let's say you read some text, and whatever meaning that you want to take out from that biblical text, you just basically interpret by your own imagination. That is what the deconstructionism means. And that is dangerous to any faith, especially Christianity. Instead of accepting what the Bible actually says, deconstructionist thinks that he can determine the motive behind what was written and come up with the real or hidden meaning of the text. So instead of what Paul says or what Jesus wants to say, deconstructionists would try to interpret the scripture by their own philosophy or by their own ideas or by their own imaginations. So that is what the deconstructionism means. And we can go on with an entire episode on the deconstructionism. But just to highlight some of the thing is that if anyone were to take deconstructionism to its logical conclusion, then findings of the deconstructionist would themselves have to be deconstructed to determine what the deconstructionist really said. It is an endless circular reasoning and self-defeating argument. Romans 1, 21, 22, Paul sums up most postmodernism thinkers who hold to such theory as deconstructionism. It says in Romans 1, 21 and 22, for even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they become fools. So even after knowing the truth or even after knowing who God is, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. They became futile in their own speculations. The deconstructionists, they do not study the Bible in an order to find out the meaning intended by the writer, but to attempt to discern the cultural and social motives behind what was written. So that is deconstructionism. Now, as I mentioned, that it is a self-defeating nature of postmodernism. Their claim is that there is no absolute truth. But this statement itself is a self-defeating statement, because if there is no truth, if someone says that what you say is not truth, but if there is no absolute truth, then how would you say that what he is saying is truth? How you determine that what that other person is saying is truth? So this itself is an absolute truth claim. When you say that there is no absolute truth, you are making a claim about an absolute truth. So postmodernism collapses under its own logic. It's a self-defeating fallacy. Now, modernism and postmodernism, as we have already ruled out the differences, modernism is certainty, progress, universal values, objective truth through reason, whereas postmodernism is skepticism, relativism, plurality, truth shaped by culture and power. These are some of the differences between modernism and postmodernism on their view of truth. Modernism believes the objective, universal truth, whereas postmodernism is relative, contextual, socially constructed kind of a view. Reason and knowledge, rationality and science are best way to achieve progress and knowledge. For postmodernism, rationality is not neutral. Knowledge is shaped by power, culture, and language. History, their view on morality. Modernism believes that universal moral values, absolute right and wrong, whereas for postmodernism believes that morality is relative, depending on the culture and perspective. Modernism trust in the institutions like science, government, religion, tradition. Postmodernism, they always skeptics, they suspicion towards the institutions. Authority is seen as constructed and oppressive. Religion and faith. Modernism allows for objective claims about God, whereas postmodernism often rejects or deconstructs the religious absolute, spirituality seen as subjective. So these are some of the differences between modernism and postmodernism and its application on religion and faith. Now, what is postmodern Christianity? Postmodernism is quickly spreading into Christian circles, and many progressive Christians and many denominations, they adopt some of the ideology of the postmodernism. So, what is postmodern Christianity? So, postmodern Christianity blends postmodern thinking with the Christian faith. So, what we have seen, relative truth, no absolute truth, or deconstructivism, pluralism, these are ideas that has been adopted by many Christians, and they are moving towards the postmodern Christianity, and that is something dangerous to Christian faith. They prioritize experience over doctrine or reason. Biblical authority is replaced by individual interpretation. What we have seen in deconstructivism is that they try to interpret their own meaning according to their imagination. So they emphasize feelings, spirituality, and subjectivity over objectivity or absolute truth. Tolerance viewed as the highest value. So most of the progressive Christian or liberals, you will see this postmodern ideology that tolerance, you have to be tolerant towards LGBTQ community, or God is love. You just have to love. You don't have to say that what they are doing wrong. You don't have to impose your biblical views on someone else. So you just have to tolerate them. That is a kind of an ideology that is coming out from postmodernism. Postmodernism sometimes downplays sin, judgment, biblical authority, sometimes theological compromises that we can see in many churches. And these are some of the impact that the postmodernism has on Christianity, and it's already spreading to the churches. Now, why Christian needs to know about postmodernism? Because postmodernism undermines the absolute truth. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the life, I am the truth. There is an absolute truth. When we look at the mathematics, 2 plus 2 is always 4. It cannot be 3 or it cannot be 5. So it's an absolute truth that 2 plus 2 is going to be 4. For the locksmith, for any particular lock, there is only one key that will fit into that lock, not many keys. So that is an objection against pluralism, that pluralism cannot be true. That has to be an absolute truth. There has to be an absolute right and wrong. Postmodernism relativizes morality and eroding biblical values. Postmodernism promotes skepticism, making faith seems optional. Postmodernism can lead to nihilism and loss of meaning. So there is no absolute meaning from the biblical text. You can interpret the way you want according to your own imagination, your own philosophy, your own thinking, but you're not trying to understand what Jesus says or what the scripture says, what Paul wants to say from the particular scripture. So that is an impact, and that is why Christian needs to know about postmodernism and need to be aware of this philosophy. Now, what are the practical implications for the believers? You need to test every teaching and new thought against the scripture. Like it says in Acts 17:11, it talks about the Bereans that now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. So, people in Berea, compared to the people in Thessalonica, they examine the scriptures daily to see that what Paul is preaching is right. So we need to be like the Bereans. We need to examine the scriptures. We need to test every teaching and every new thought against the scripture. We need to avoid relativism in personal faith because we as a Christian believe that there is an objective truth. We need to uphold the gospel as universally true. We need to share Christ with clarity in a confused world. A Christian should concentrate on exalting Christ and emphasizing the sufficiency and authority of the scripture. Scripture is our base. We need to concentrate on exalting Christ and emphasizing the sufficiency and authority of the scripture. I hope this episode has helped you understanding what postmodernism is, what are its impact on Christianity. We also learn about the four dangerous things that comes out from postmodern philosophy, and that is deconstructivism, relative truth, pluralism, loss of discernment are some of the things that we need to be aware of that is quickly spreading to the Christian world, and we as a Christian need to stay firm. We need to show the skeptics that there is an objective truth, there is absolute right and wrong morality that comes from God, and we need to focus on Christ as we have seen, and we need to share Christ with clarity in a confused world. So I hope this episode has helped you understanding a definition about postmodernism and its impact on Christianity. Thank you and God bless.